Welcome back to our series on Plato's Republic. In this episode, we will discuss Book 9, which covers the tyrant. Book 9 begins with a discussion of who the tyrant is, how the tyrant comes forth from the democratic soul, the democratic life. So that's the soil out of which tyranny grows, or the tyrannical soul grows. And so I think it's significant to see the transition between what Plato refers to as the democratic soul and how that paves the way for the tyrannical soul. And we discussed this a bit in Book 8 when we discussed the democrat. But here I think it's going to be unique in relation to tyranny. Okay, so no coincidence that it begins with a discussion of pleasures and pains, and ultimately the various appetites, the various appetitive desires that we have, because these desires, for pleasure or the avoidance of pain, are going to be, for the tyrant, what rules, right? So they're going to be ruled by these. And what's unique about the tyrant is it's the tyrant, or the tyrannical soul, is the one in which these passions become lawless. These desires become lawless, meaning they operate without anything to guide them. They are, in a sense, beyond the law. They are the lawmakers of the human life. And what that does for the tyrant is it actually enslaves the tyrant. And so what you find is that the one who takes just uncontrolled freedom of the passions, freedom of desire, to be what rules their life, is going to become a slave to the passions, and in a sense, they're going to be the ones that are capable of experiencing the least amount or degree of pleasure, of fulfillment as possible. And so what's, I think, fascinating to realize about the Republic, especially Book 9, it comes to the fore, Plato thinks that the life, ordered by reason, the life ordered by the intellect is the highest life. And you might think that has nothing thereby or therefore to do with pleasure. But in Book 9, we find Plato actually saying that when all of the parts are properly ordered, all of the intellect's doing what the intellect ought to be doing, and the will's doing what the will ought to be doing, and the passions are doing what the passions ought to be doing, each experiences the most amount of pleasure that it, in its kind, can experience. And so there's a type of, I don't want to say it's hedonism, because it's not exactly pleasure as such, which is the primary value. But it is the case that the well-ordered, the well-governed life is going to be the most pleasurable life as well. And so there's a way to think about the relationship of pleasure to virtue, such that the virtuous life is the most enjoyable life. But what comes out throughout this discussion in Book 9 is there's different types of pleasure, and we all know this to varying degrees, that there are different types of pleasure. The difficulty is that if you don't have a lot of experience in certain, let's call them higher pleasures, that's going to be difficult for you to understand what Plato's really up to. Now, hopefully, most of us do have experience in these to some degree. Some of us might have more experience with these higher pleasures, but what I mean is the type of fulfillment or enjoyment of I don't know, let's say contemplation. There's a type of a peace, a type of desire of sort of conforming oneself to God's will, such that even painful things that occur can be endured with a type of pleasure. It's a paradoxical thing to say that the experience of pain can be such that it is coupled with an experience of pleasure once it's understood within a broader narrative or within a broader logos. And that, I think, is what Plato is up to. The individual who is incapable of that broader experience, which is going to come through a type of understanding, if that's not experienced, or if that's not possible for one, then they'll simply experience pain as evil, as bad, and therefore they're going to think the best thing that can come from this is just the opposite, the as Plato puts it, the cessation of this pain. That's what they're looking for, and what I think he's trying to show is that there's just a different type of pleasure, a different type of pain that completely surpasses this. You could call it the bodily sensation of pain, and therefore there's a possibility of a different type of pleasure that surpasses this bodily pleasure, and so it would be possible to have a lower level pain be the occurrence of a higher level pleasure. Any form of physical training is an instance of this, where you're doing hill sprints and you're feeling very uncomfortable, right? You get your heart rate up on purpose to get very exhausted, tired. Your body is saying, this is horrible, stop doing this. But you take enjoyment in this in a completely different type of way. It's not the same type of enjoyment as you would if you were to just stop running, but the enjoyment that you take in doing this painful activity is the enjoyment of not just knowing, but knowing is going to be central to this, but of knowing that this is making you good. This is making you a better runner. It's making you healthier. It's making you a better human being. All things considered. And so I think the enjoyment is something that can accompany pain. It's a great paradox. Those that don't have that type of virtue to push through the pain for the sake of a higher logos or a higher reason won't really understand this point. But hopefully you have some understanding from some experiences in your life where you've been able to see pain as more coherent or more meaningful within a broader rationale or a broader logos. Okay, so the tyrant is the person who isn't able to do that. Doesn't do that. It's the lower level passions which rule, which dominate. And so when the body says stop, they stop. When the body says go, they go. They're not able to, sort of metaphorically order their legs to keep going when they feel like stopping, and not just order them, but to actually find fulfillment, find pleasure in so ordering them, right? And that I think is what Plato's trying to ultimately articulate when he, towards the end of this book, when he says the tyrant is the one who experiences the least amount of pleasure, and as he calls it, the king, or the well-ordered ruler, the just man, is the one who experiences the most amount of pleasure. And that's because they're the ones that can experience that higher level pleasure. And there's a type of freedom in such a life, right? There's the tyrant, the one who can't do the hill sprints just because their body says it's painful, just stop doing it. That person, there's a type of enslavement in that for Plato, because they can't order their passions. They can't say, I know it's good for me to do this, but I just don't want to. They can't overcome that that type of strength of the passions, right? And so you kind of feel your spirit is willing, but your flesh is weak in a sense, and so the flesh is stronger than the spirit, and so the flesh is actually the will that lives in you. It's the one that dictates and determines action, and so you live a life that's less free because you can't actually do the things that you want to do. Following St. Paul, you find yourself not doing the things that you want to do, and doing the things that you tell yourself you don't want to do. And so you find yourself in this type of slavery, right? You're always on the opposite end of what your reason is telling you is good, or would be a good way to live. And so you find yourself enslaved. Okay, and on the theme of enslavement or slavery through the passions, and the notion of lawlessness, I think one of the things that's unique to the tyrant in Book 9, which is of great relevance for us, is he describes it on. Let's see, this is the Stephanus number 573 D, between D and E. He talks about the creation of needs. There are lots of terrible appetites sprout up each day and night beside it, creating needs for all sorts of things. And the thing that is profound about this is that kind of reflect on this point in your own life, the ways in which you've created needs for yourself, which have thereby become something that enslaves you, and you kind of wish you could go back and say, I don't want this to be a need anymore. I don't want to feel that I have to whatever, right? You wish you could go back and undo that so that this was never a part of your life in the first place. Now, this could be very significant things, drugs or whatnot, but it could even be, much more, mundane, in some sense lesser, but I think it's perhaps even more pervasive in most of our lives than we realize. But I mean, a standard example and this isn't so much a condemnation as just an opportunity for you to reflect on what is a created need in your life, which thereby becomes something that, doubles back and then enslaves you. I think a standard example would be something like technology, specifically, like probably the standard one now would be like the phone, the cell phone, where it seems like it's going to, open up your life, make a lot about your life better. Communication is going to be easier. It's going to be more regular. You're going to feel more connected, right? You're not going to have as many perhaps stresses in life, because now when you go somewhere, you can always look up directions or contact this person, so you won't be stranded on the highway. All these things that people older than 35, 40 years old have had at some point in their early life. But these are not stresses that anyone really has, because you have this technology. Now, one of the things that this technology then can do is it can create a need, or there's an attachment that's created such that now you can't drive a car without a phone, or you can't go to the store without a phone, and it could even get to the point where it's not just about going places and having GPS or communication, but it's the practice of certain social media becomes a created need, so that you feel the need. You have to check what's going on Facebook, or you have to check what's going on Twitter, because you feel like you're missing out. There's this desire or this need that you have, because you've embedded yourself within that domain. It's almost like you now are wedded to it, and you can't remove yourself from it. You can't step out of that. Just as some of us think you can't step out of real life, you have obligations, you have duties to people around you. You can't just check out. In social media, for some people, there's something similar, even if it's not as explicitly sort of recognized. There's a type of enslavement, or at least the potential for enslavement, that comes through this created need, and so you almost feel this anxiety that you have to continually stay up to date, and that's a type of I think that's related to what Plato's saying with the passions and creating these needs, which ultimately are difficult to control. And so for any of the passions that Plato has in mind, or even if it's not in Plato's mind, for any passion there is a corresponding addiction, and so what that ultimately is it's this loss or lawlessness, which that passion operates by, so that you tell yourself, okay, I'm only going to check my email 2 times a day, but your reason isn't stronger than that desire to check your email, and so that law has no control or no power over you, and so you find yourself checking your email 60 times a day. It might not be email, it might be text messages or Twitter or whatever, but you tell yourself, no, this is getting out of hand. I've got to control this. But saying it isn't going to give you freedom from it, because of the fact that it within your soul operates in a lawless manner, which is to say it becomes a tyrant in your life. And so this is, a kind of a minor iteration of what I think Plato is trying to articulate. And so that experience that you've had of not being free of something, even if it's something so minor as like picking up your phone and checking to see what's going on, I'm sure at some point every person that owns a phone has thought, I think I probably use this a little bit too much. And so they've tried to come up with a way of regulating that, and they've experienced the complete and utter failure of following through with their proposed program of regulation. And so they've experienced what it is to be enslaved to something internal, right? They feel that they have lost control. And so what they do, what I do, what you've probably done, what everyone's probably done, is you go and you look for some other way of regulating this, which is external to your life, not internal. And so this can be in the form of some sort of program, some mode on your phone that, every 3 hours your phone, goes on airplane mode or whatever. And so that you can't, check text messages and whatever it is, right? So some sort of external mediation that steps in and tries to rule your life for you, tries to order your life for you, because you've recognized, I've lost control of this. But the thing to note about all of this external mediation, whether it's, various usage applications on your phone, filtering applications on your computer or whatever it is, that's all an external fix. They're perhaps good first steps, but that's never going to make you free of the passion that you've realized you've lost control of, because the problem is not an external problem. The problem is an internal problem. And so what needs to happen is the tyrant, which is to say that lawless ruling passion within you, it needs to be properly ordered and ruled. And that's not something that can happen merely by an external or an extrinsic fix or ruler, because, as many of us have known, you're the ones that, institute this program on your phone to shut off, to go into airplane mode or whatever it is that people do. I don't have a cell phone, so I don't exactly know how these work, but there are the programs on computers that are like, work mode, and so email and everything shut off so you can like focus on just Microsoft Word or whatever, so you don't get distracted. But all of those things are things that you institute, and so if I really wanted to, I could just turn those off right now, or find a way to turn them off, or find a way to sort of circumnavigate all that. And many times people do, and so then it becomes once again just a good try, but the tyrant will always prevail. And so the only thing that can beat the tyrant is an internal change, an internal ordering. I believe there's something in C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce about this. It's been years since I've read this, so I can't remember, but just speaking now, I want to say there's something in Lewis's Great Divorce about this. But I can't remember. So if anyone remembers, please email me and let me know, because I can't remember where this is in there. But the internal disorder can't be fixed extrinsically. The extrinsic or the external is secondary to the internal. It doesn't mean it's like less important. It's just what the external ultimately is it's the fruit, or the it's the flower of the internal order. You can sort of tinker with like the external, which might aid an internal change, and sometimes it does, right? So think about if you're a parent and you have children who have really bad tempers, you can try to help them get better control of their tempers by disciplining them, because you hit your sister, you don't get dessert, or you don't get any brown sugar in your oatmeal this morning because you were, fighting during bedtime. That type of discipline is an external attempt to bring about an internal change or ordering in the child, and it can happen, but it's also possible that it doesn't happen. It's not like discipline is just perfectly, flawless magic, that if you implement this discipline plan, then your children will be virtuous people. Somehow the child has to internalize the discipline, that what discipline ultimately is. It's an attempt to order that individual's life properly, and if discipline gets internalized, then it's successful. But it's not always the case that happens, and so it's kind of a mystery why sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't, or how long it takes. I think a lot has to do with the way that it's done. But the point at hand, going back to Plato, the point at hand is you can't free yourself. You can't make yourself free by external means. Freedom always originates internal, and therefore the tyrant is the one who can never be free unless they free themselves of their own slavery. And this is, in the past when I've taught ethics courses, I usually teach Plato's Republic, or I have, maybe not usually, but I have taught Plato's Republic in conjunction with Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, because I think one of the things going on in Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov commits this horrendous murder, double murder actually, and he's torn. The name Raskolnikov in Russian means split. He's sort of severed. He's split, and he's trying to unify his life. This might sound familiar with the notion of justice in Plato. He's trying to unify his life. He's living almost these two lives. There's this life inside of him, and there's this life outside of him, and he's incredibly unhappy. If you ever want to see an image of someone who is very psychologically torn, crushed, such that it's a very unpleasant life. Read through Crime and Punishment, thinking about the type of inner angst, inner turmoil that occurs in that character. And I think it's something that all of us have some experience of, maybe not to the extent of having committed a double axe murder, but in various ways, all of us have experienced that type of split, life, and I think the way that he is cured of this ultimately, at the end, I won't spoil it, because I hope that all of you read the novel. But the way he's cured of it comes through this great pain, which almost requires the death of one of those lives. If you're living two lives, the only way to be free of this division is by one of those lives dying, which means it's going to be a very painful experience a painful process. But freedom will come. But the question is which of those two is going to be the one that dies? Which of the two lives is going to be the one that goes? Right? And this is unfortunately, presented in cartoons as the two angels on your shoulder, and which way are you going to go type of thing. That's a stupid image. I would much rather have you in your head think about the image of Raskolnikov rather than the two angels on your shoulders. But it's a similar principle. One of those angels is going to have to die. One of the parts of your soul is going to have to be completely crushed. And the great mystery is which one is it, and how does that come about? In Crime and Punishment, we find ultimately that Raskolnikov is incapable of freeing himself, and so someone else who is innocent has to bear his cross, bear his burden, and that plays a sanctifying role in redeeming him, in helping him participate in the death of Christ, the death of an innocent sufferer on his behalf. So I don't want to go into too much about Crime and Punishment because this is about Plato's Republic, but there's a lot of similarities. I would say Crime and Punishment is like the Christian Russian Orthodox retelling of Plato's Republic. It's a very beautiful novel, disturbing in pages, but that's partly the human life too. Disturbing in many aspects, but also very beautiful in the whole picture of redemption. So the tyrannical nature is something that I think all of us have had some experience of, because none of us are truly just individuals. We all have had a taste or a share in tyranny, and the effects of tyranny, I think, are numerous. I'll just mention one that's brought up throughout the course of this book, is that the tyrannical nature, as Plato puts it on 576a, the tyrannical nature they live their entire lives without ever being friends with anyone, always masters to one man or slaves to another, but never getting a taste of freedom or true friendship. So the tyrant can never experience what it means to be a friend, and that's because they see and experience everything as either about me taking it or domineering it, or it becomes basically an object that I possess, that I own, or I am merely an object of their possession that they own. So either I'm a master of someone, or I'm a slave of someone. I'm either someone's superior or I'm someone's inferior. Or perhaps we're fighting with each other to see who's going to be the superior and who's going to be the inferior. And so I think what Plato's trying to articulate is there's something completely new, completely foreign to the unjust man, and that's friendship, which is a type of equality that comes through submitting your will to another, giving yourself over to another, and that's not really the same as slavery, because slavery is about the master, the stronger, actively submitting another, sort of against their will. And so the concept of a a free act of handing oneself over to another is a very foreign concept. Just as we saw with the distinction between the philosopher and the sophist, the act of admitting that you're wrong, of coming to that admission, that type of humility required for philosophy, is foreign to the sophist. Something like that's like the intellectual, example. The example that pertains to the will, or the volitional example, the one that pertains to the will, would be the one about friendship, where the possibility of handing yourself over to another would be just as incoherent, just as perplexing to a sophist or to a tyrant as anything would be. And so the thing that prevents the tyrant from being able to have friends in the true sense, that is, without merely seeing a friend as a slave, or as an object, or as a tool for my use, what prevents them from having friends is the fact that the tyrant cannot submit to anything. The tyrant refuses to submit to anything, and that's because they, as we said at the very beginning, they live lawlessly. There is no law by which they, or in which they operate, because if they were to operate under a law, then they would have to, recognize that they are ultimately submitting to that law, and therefore one step further to whatever is the source or the authority of that law, the origin of the normativity of that law. But that's precisely what the tyrant refuses to do, and has forced their own lives in such a way that they become incapable of submitting to a law. Going back to our example of, okay, for Lent, I'm not going to, do X, Y, or Z. And, on Ash Wednesday +1, you find yourself doing X, Y, and Z. And that's because of the fact that your passions aren't good citizens. They don't follow the speed limit when no one's looking. They're very bad rule followers if your soul's not in good order, and most of our souls are not in good order, and so we think, okay, things will go well because I have this great law in place, or this great plan of legislation on how my life's going to go, and then you tell your passions, okay, do this, and then of course it doesn't happen. Once again, this is all just like metaphorical description of these different parts of the soul as like people. But that's the image that Plato uses. So I don't want you to think that I actually think that the passions are these things that the intellect talks to and then they talk back. It's not like these are all separate. There's just one human being that all of these are different aspects that kind of intermingle into the singularity of the human life. But the thing about the tyrannical soul is that it doesn't abide by law, and so law isn't going to be capable of ordering it. What would have to happen is it has to come ultimately to be in a certain sense crushed. Which is why at one point Plato talks about, for the tyrant, or for the unjust person, which ultimately is to say the one on the road to living a tyrannical life, the unjust person, it would be better if they were caught in their injustice, right? It's better for the unjust person to be caught, to not get away with their injustice, because to be caught, which would be a way of saying they're crushed. There's a rebellion that overpowers the tyrant and throws the tyrant down. That is going to be the first step in ordering properly, right? And so there's a legislation won't get rid of tyranny, right? Because the tyrant doesn't operate by legislation, right? If the tyrant issues legislation, it's just going to be the strong arm of the tyrant, right? So law, if it's the law of a tyrannical soul or a tyrannical state, law will always be at the service of injustice. Even if it's under the guise of justice, it could have sort of the contours of justice, but if it's ultimately issued to proffer an unjust life, then it ultimately serves injustice, which is to say this slavery. Okay, and so the person that lives this life, as we've discussed at the beginning of this episode, the person that lives the tyrannical life at first thinks it's going to be pleasant, but then they find themselves enslaved, and it ultimately becomes a type of pain. There's a pain that accompanies the tyrannical life, and for those that have really experienced firsthand injustice actively, maybe not necessarily passively, but actively, there's something painful psychologically, painful internally with the bearing of that, the weightiness of that, the holding on to that act, and having to kind of continue living life with that. And it's an open question. This, I think, is what crime and punishment is about. It's an open question whether or not one can do an action like commit a murder and not have it crush them. Is the weight of sin death? Right, I think is the question of crime and punishment. Can you commit sin and still live a happy life? But not just like, minor sins like, there was a can of Coke on your friend's desk and you took it and you drank it. But real weighty sins. And what crime and punishment, I think, is trying to reflect on is it possible for a human being to commit a murder in just complete cold blood? Say in insanity. Now this might be bordering on incoherency, but I think this is what Dostoevsky's trying to investigate. What would be the effects of that if someone did that? What would be would it be possible to go on and live a perfectly fulfilled, happy life? Or is it going to crush you? Is it going to ruin you? Is it going to torment you in a way that you now become living? You become a living hell, right? Is it the case that doing this action isn't going to make you, as the saying goes, go to hell later, but is it going to be such that it makes you live in hell now? And I think what Dostoevsky's trying to propose is what sin ultimately is it's the living out of hell in the moment. Right, and so I think there's something similar going on with the tyrannical man as the one who lives the most unpleasant life in the moment, right, now. Okay, and it's I think the richness of Book 9, but also I think of the whole Republic, comes about when you try to apply it to your own life, the ways in which you see yourself as a tyrant, the ways in which you see yourself as enslaved. I think that's where the real glory of the Platonic dialogue comes out, because it becomes something that now you dialogue with, rather than you just read and try to think about what this other person thinks. What does it mean for this other person? But once you internalize it, it kind of becomes alive. I mean, once again, like we said much earlier on in the series, it's just like the scriptures in a methodological sense, right? Okay, the last thing that I want to address before wrapping this up is what comes at the very end. There's a type of pessimism that Socrates seems to have at the very end of Book 9. He seems to suggest that the just person won't want to engage in public life because of the fact that the vast majority of people, for whom he will be guardian or ruler, don't want him to rule or to guard, and so it's basically going to be like reason telling the passions, okay, don't do X, Y, and Z, and the passions are like, we're not listening to you. We actually want to kill you, and live our lives how we want to live them. And so, what Socrates says at the very end of this is actually a real, I think, beautiful image. This goes once again back to the relationship between the city and the soul, and what were we seeking in the first place? Were we seeking to establish a city, or were we seeking to establish a well-ordered soul? Or perhaps those are the same question, just the one is writ large. So here's how the Book 9 ends. So I'll just quote this and we'll comment a little bit, and then we'll be done. So Glaucon says, so he won't be willing to take part in politics, he, the just man, won't be willing to take part in politics then, if that is what he cares about. Yes, by the dog, in his own city he certainly will, but he may not be willing to do so in his fatherland, barring some stroke of divine luck. Glaucon says, I understand. You mean in the city we have just been founding and describing, the one that exists in words, since I do not think it exists anywhere on earth. Right, so the city that they've been describing as an image of the soul, Glaucon says, it exists in words. My guess is the Greek is in logo, in logos, sorry, in reason it exists, but not anywhere on earth. Socrates responds, but there may perhaps be a model of it in the heavens, for anyone who wishes to look at it and to found himself on the basis of what he sees. It makes no difference at all whether it exists anywhere or ever will. You see, he would take part in the politics of it alone and of no other. Okay, so I think what's going on here is to understand how you ought to rule your soul. That is how your soul ought to be properly ordered. You need an example of proper order. You need a model of proper rule. And that's what they just arrived at, is they arrived at a model of proper rule, not by actually looking at real examples, right? Because there is no city like the one founded in words throughout this discussion from books 1 through 9 of the Republic, right? They were just describing and sort of building up a just city. What would it be like? What would the people have to be like? And now what they find is, what are the chances that is going to be an actual city that can take place on Earth? the chances are like almost non-existent. They're so low that it's unlikely that that's ever going to occur. And it looks like that would be the type of city where one should take part in political rule. The thing to, I guess, the interesting dialectic going on is, so then what does that mean about my individual, like say, incarnate life? How should I live my life? If it's impossible to have an incarnate just city, is it possible to have an incarnate just soul? Is that my individual life, can that be something which is just? And what Socrates seems to be suggesting is, yes, to a certain extent, he would have to look, or I would have to look, to the perfect model of justice, even if that doesn't exist anywhere here. So you kind of look, as he says metaphorically, to the heavens for the model of justice by which to found the rule of your soul. And I think which he thinks is seemingly possible. And so I think what the implication of this is that you, through virtue, through proper living, through justice, you can make your life like the model in the heavens, which is to say, through proper, politics of the soul, the ruling of the soul, your life becomes more divine, more heavenly, as it were, in this last paragraph, right? So the act of ethics, or the ethical project or endeavor for Plato, seems to ultimately be pushing towards making your life like the model in the heavens, which is to make it a better and a better and a better icon of, or an image of, a participant of that heavenly reality. And I think this can transition into a lot of what's going on in St. Augustine and a lot of the Christian Neoplatonists with the notion of making the earthly participate in the divine. Everything is sort of looking towards the divine, and the closer it resembles that, the more it participates in that. And so there's a sense in which the kingdom of heaven can exist on earth through the well-ordered life. But ultimately, in Christianity, this comes about ultimately through the church, which is a type of state in a way, but it's also very, very different from a typical or normal state or city. And so, if you're looking for kind of more on the church as a polis in the Platonic sense, you should read The City of God by St. Augustine, because I believe it dovetails with a lot of these questions. And so with that, we'll end Book 9, and we'll pick up with our last book, Book 10, in the next episode.